Welcome to part 3 of our sit-down with James Comer, talking about the Biden crime family and the financial crimes. In part 3, we talk about where the money was coming from, and will Hunter Biden ever have to tell the truth under oath? Welcome to Verdict with Ted Cruz, part 3 of our sit-down with James Comer. If you missed part 1 or part 2, make sure you go back and listen to everything that he had to say in those 2 parts. Now, part 3 is really interesting, as we sat down earlier this week, because we got to talk about where all the money is coming from. And now, how much trouble is the president actually in? Take a listen.
So let me ask you something. When you subpoenaed Hunter, he came back and said he was willing to testify, but only in an open hearing, not in a closed-door deposition. Tell us from your perspective what the advantages are of doing a closed-door deposition first before open public testimony.
We have tens of thousands of pages of documents, bank statements, emails, sworn testimony. We have hundreds and hundreds of questions. Probably close to 1,000 questions. In a deposition, you have 1 hour. The Republicans have an hour, then the Democrats have an hour. Then you come back and have another hour. The Democrats have another hour. So, easily you can get an 8-hour deposition in a day, whereas we would have 4 hours. The staff would generally be the ones that would, which I have, my lead deposer was the lead deposer at the Department of Justice in the Trump administration under Bill Barr. So we've got really good people that are really good at this, and Judiciary does too. Jim has good people in there. They were both going to be in there. We were going to ask them specific questions, hundreds of questions. If you have a committee hearing where you have 25 Republicans and 21 Democrats going back and forth, yelling, the Democrats at the last hearing, they filed 3 motions to adjourn during the committee hearing, trying to disrupt it. You get 5 minutes each back and forth. We might get 40, 45 questions in. So it's a difference of 40 or 45 questions in a complete chaotic poop scene versus a sit down substantive deposition where we could easily ask 800 questions. This is too important. This is an investigation of public corruption at the highest levels. This has been a substantive, credible investigation that we've accumulated mountains of evidence through bank records and emails. We have lots of questions. You just can't get that in a public hearing. But I want to have a public hearing with Hunter Biden, and we will have a hearing with Hunter Biden after he gets deposed.
For what it's worth, James, and this is something that I've talked about on Verdict recently. Look, you're in the middle of the fight. You're working your tail off with a lot of complicated stuff. I understand everything you said there, and I agree. There's a lot of force to the arguments you're putting forward. To the extent I can share some unsolicited advice, which I did in our last podcast, and, I'm a lawyer and a senator, so I'm in the business of giving unsolicited advice. But I would encourage y'all to go ahead and have him in a public hearing anyway. And I understand why it would be better to depose him. But from their perspective, they can litigate and fight this contempt for the rest of the year and run out the clock, and that's what they want to do. And I know you know this very directly, but just I want to remind our listeners, this is ultimately about Joe Biden, not about Hunter Biden. And although the questions won't be as detailed, there won't be as much time in a public hearing, getting Hunter publicly, he claims he will do it. And I would also encourage, and I don't know the House rules, the mechanics for doing this, but to the extent you can, I would encourage you, if you do a public hearing with Hunter, instead of doing 5-minute rounds, do 10-minute rounds. In the Senate and the Judiciary Committee, we often do 7-minute rounds or 10-minute rounds. For a Supreme Court nominee, we do 30-minute rounds. The difference as a cross-examiner of what you can get in a 10-minute round versus a 5-minute round is night and day. And so I would just... I think the value, if we could get Hunter to testify in January, and if your team could work with your down dais members to have, all right, here are all the questions we need to get. Can you take this module? You take this module. So, sometimes you and I both know there are hearings where you have members, they all do their own thing, and they're all running around like crazy. For something like this, to the extent the down dais Republicans each can take a particular issue and say, all right, I'm going to take my 5 or even better 10 minutes and ask the questions. Would it be as good as a deposition? No, but I think the value of doing that publicly, if Hunter would answer those questions, the legal jeopardy for Joe would be massive from that, and I think that outweighs the strategic benefit of waiting for the closed-door deposition. So consider that. I don't need an answer from you now, but that,
Okay.
Look, I've litigated a lot of cases, and that would be my pretty emphatic advice, is that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because getting Hunter on the record in public on all the questions that we've been talking about, that is enormously valuable. And I don't want to see the clock run out, particularly if, look, you and I are both hoping there's a good election in November, but it could be a bad election. If in November the speaker is Hakeem Jeffries, your committee's going away, and they're in the deposition, they're in the public hearing, and it's all over. So we can hope we have a good election, but I think it's wise to assume that your clock may be at most 11 months.
I agree, or less.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Let me ask you this question, too. As we kind of put a wrap on this, I want to play Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
And I want to play what he said, because I don't know if, a lot of people thought the White House was probably giving me advice. I think there seems to be a little bit of a rift now between the White House. We're seeing some leaks coming out. They didn't like what Hunter Biden did at this press conference. And that means he's kind of a rogue actor in this scenario right now. I want to get your reaction to just his demeanor and what he said. Take a look.
Let me state as clearly as I can. My father was not financially involved in my business, not as a practicing lawyer, not as a board member of Burisma, not in my partnership with a Chinese private businessman, not in my investments at home nor abroad, and certainly not as an artist. During my battle with addiction, my parents were there for me. They literally saved my life. They helped me in ways that I will never be able to repay. And of course, they would never expect me to. And in the depths of my addiction, I was extremely irresponsible with my finances. But to suggest that as grounds for an impeachment inquiry is beyond the absurd. It's shameless. There is no evidence to support the allegations that my father was financially involved in my business, because it did not happen. James Comer, Jim Jordan, Jason Smith, and their colleagues have distorted the facts by cherry-picking lines from a bank statement, manipulating texts I sent, editing the testimony of my friends and former business partners, and misstating personal information that was stolen from me.
He accuses you of manipulating text messages without any evidence and says that you guys are cherry-picking lines. I got to get your response to that.
I've never seen such a display of arrogance and entitlement in my life. But I'm not surprised, because, look, he's gotten away with this for years because he's a Biden. The rules don't apply to the Bidens. But I don't know how you manipulate a text. Was his father beside him when he was extorting that Chinese national or not? That's a simple question the media should have asked then and there. Bank records don't lie.
They stopped the GPS. You and I have talked about this here. We could have answered that question.
Well, okay, and it's important. Look, there's a reason people hate lawyers. I listen to that as a lawyer. When they say manipulating a text, what they mean is one of the copies that was released of the WhatsApp text from one of the House members, they put a Chinese flag next to the Chinese person speaking to identify them. So like, aha, you manipulated it, because in the real one, there's not a Chinese flag. So it's true, for purposes of display, they added a Chinese flag to demonstrate that that was a Chinese person. When they say manipulated, what they don't mean, what Hunter has never said, what his lawyers have never said, is that one word of that text is inaccurate. What they have never said is, I did not send that. And we talked about on verdict, one possible defense he could have is, nope, that text is fake, I never sent it. Now, that's a defense you can make, but then you got to prove it. The fact that they haven't said that, much like like Sherlock Holmes and the dog that didn't bark. The fact that they didn't say that tells you that they are implicitly admitting it is accurate. We also know that DOJ prevented any search of GPS data. It would be very easy to determine where was Hunter's cell phone at the moment that text was being sent, where was Joe's cell phone, were they in the same room, were they sitting next to each other. The Biden Department of Justice does not want anyone to know the answer to that, and so they block that. But by the way, that text is direct evidence. So next time you hear a Democrat or their shills in the media saying there's no direct evidence of Joe Biden's involvement, understand that WhatsApp text is direct evidence. It's not circumstantial. It is written testimony from Hunter about Joe's involvement in the shakedown. And I got to say, by the way, Ben, I noticed something. So, James, in our last podcast, we held the New York Times to task because they took Hunter Biden's quote at the press conference that my father was not financially involved with my business, and they misquoted it to say my father was not involved in my business. They deleted the word financially, and that was, I believe, a very deliberate deletion.
Absolutely.
Well, what's interesting, I just discovered something again. Let me ask the team, put up the very last shot from the Hunter Biden video that we were watching, if we can put it on the screen. Now, if you notice, CNN did the same damn thing.
Yeah.
Look at the chyron on the bottom. Hunter Biden, my father was not involved in any of my businesses. What he said was, my father was not financially involved in any of my businesses. CNN and New York Times both deleted the same word. By the way, they know how to quote what he said. Often a chyron will be Hunter Biden, quote, my father was not financially involved in any of my businesses. But understand, CNN is on Team Biden. They're on Team Hunter. They're on Team Joe. And it reminds me of the famous CNN chyron of the reporter saying, fiery but peaceful protest as a building is on fire with a Black Lives Matter and Antifa protest going on. CNN is happily editing out Hunter's comments to benefit the White House.
James, let me ask you one other question about this that I think is also very important, and that is to remind people financially now, how many countries was the Biden crime family getting money from? We haven't even mentioned in the last hour Romania. That's a country that has to be brought up. But you guys are finding more money in more places with more people. And even Hunter Biden there and what he said with my foreign business dealings, plural, he was admitting, I'm getting money from everywhere in the world.
Yeah. We know he got money from China, Romania, Ukraine, Russia, Uzbekistan. We know that he was paid through China for stuff he did in the Congo. We know that Jim Biden operated primarily in the Middle East. So pretty much every bad country in the world is where the Bidens would target their influence peddling schemes.
Do you expect to get anything new about James Biden's money? I mean, we obviously know a lot about Hunter's, but are you guys finding more and more of James? Because before Hunter Biden was of age, James was the bag man. And then it kind of turned into, oh, hey, we've got a kid here that we can get to be the bag man, and we have an excuse for his actions that he's a drug addict, which is exactly what Hunter Biden said in that video. I was in the depths of addiction. You should feel sorry for me. I just needed money from anybody. James Biden seems to be smarter and have done this for decades, while Hunter's kind of the pupil under him.
Yeah. We have a lot of questions for James Biden. Again, the reason no one knows much about him is he didn't leave a laptop lying around. But having looked at his bank records from his LLC and from his personal bank records, I have a lot of questions for James Biden. It'll be very interesting.
So does it appear that James, Joe's brother, was as involved in this family business as Hunter was? Would you say they're equally complicit?
I wouldn't say he's as involved, but a lot of transactions in and out of James Biden's LLC were with the Biden shell companies. And then obviously the $240,000 that came from Hunter's shell companies went through James Biden's personal account, and had him write the money to Joe Biden. I think at the end of the day, when Joe Biden was saying, "Oh, there's not a shred of evidence, not a shred of evidence," they thought that we would try to get their taxes. And I never wanted their taxes. I wanted their bank records. I've looked at enough tax returns as a director of a bank. You want to look at the bank statements. Bank statements don't lie. And you would have never seen that money to Joe. You would never see any of these millions of dollars they're labeling as loans if you had just subpoenaed the tax records. You had to get their bank statement.
And to be clear, the $200,000 payment that went from Jim to Joe that they claim was a loan repayment, there is zero evidence, or to use Joe's phrase, not a scintilla of evidence that that was actually a loan that had ever gone from Joe to Jim in the first place. In other words, there has to be a loan in order for a loan to be repaid. Is there any evidence at all that that loan existed?
No, it's not hard to prove a loan. If you pay me back $100,000, then I should have a check to you for $100,000 at some point before you paid me back $100,000. That's pretty simple,
Yep.
and I think every American, even the financially illiterate ones, understand that.
All right, two more questions I want to get to. What do you make of the fact that the countries that are doing business with Hunter and Jim Biden are all countries that are shady, that have corrupt oligarchs, that are to various degrees enemies of America, that they don't do business with any of our close allies? You don't see them doing business with England. You don't see them doing business with France or Germany. You don't see them doing business with Japan. You don't see them doing business with Canada. I mean, there are lots of countries where people can do business with them where it's not necessarily shady. You go out of your way to find places like Russia and China that says something. What do you make of that?
I think that was their business model. We know they sold the Biden brand, but where did you sell the Biden brand? You sold the Biden brand in shady countries. You revolved the business model around people who were in trouble. Burisma, the Romanian foreign national, the Russian oligarch. China is always in trouble because no one wants them in the United States. We don't want China buying farmland. We don't want China buying our energy companies. But they use the Bidens to try to get their foot in the door. Everywhere they operated were in countries where we have problems with bad people from bad countries.
All right, last question. Something Hunter mentions at the end of that press conference that's kind of gratuitously tossed on there. He says, Dad wasn't involved in Burisma, in my legal practice, such as it was, in my businesses. And then he says, or with me as an artist. And it kind of pops out of nowhere there. What do you make of that? And what is your take on quote, Hunter as an artist?
Well, Hunter was never an artist until Joe became president. And it looks like their business model changed from 2014 to 2018. They were taking wires directly through those shell companies. Then the IRS rolls in on them. Then they start trying to say this money they were taking in from influence peddling were loans. Then once Joe became president, they stopped all of that, and Hunter started selling art. So I believe the influence peddling may still be going on. It's going on through the art sales. We need to know who's purchasing this artwork. That's why one of the people we've subpoenaed.
Do we know that? Do we know who's purchasing the artwork and how much they're paying?
We think we know of two people, and they're part of the people we're trying to bring in to ask questions or to depose. So that's something every American should want to know. Who's buying this artwork?
So even with the investigation going on, and this is just to make it clear to the American people where we are now, there's no reason to believe that the Biden said, okay, they're on to us, let's shut it down. They just said, okay, they're on to us, let's change the way that we're operating our business. We found out, for example, that the first American hostage that was released from Hamas had a family member who had bought artwork from Hunter Biden. Is another example of still now this is going on in real time.
So do we have evidence? Do we know how many paintings Hunter has sold, to whom, and for how much? Those are basic questions. Since Joe became president, do we know whether he's sold one painting, 50 paintings, or 100 paintings?
We know he sold several. They bragged about it. The art director, George Burgess, he's one of the people we expect to depose, hopefully in January. We'll ask those questions.
And has any of Hunter Biden's art ever hung in any government buildings or the White House that would, in theory, raise the price of that artwork, the value of that artwork, because we know that artwork where it hangs can increase the value significantly?
I don't know that. That'll be a great question. We can ask George Burgess.
But the point you made, that there's no evidence Hunter was an artist until Daddy became president, is rather amazing. Every artist I've ever known, they've been an artist their whole life. They've been painting. Usually people have been painting since they were kids. If you want to be a commercial artist, most people don't start off saying, I'm going to paint something and sell it for $500,000. Is the Biden family blocking your committee getting the information on how many paintings have been sold to whom and for how much?
Well, somebody's blocking it. Again, that's the question we're going to ask the art gallery owner, and we're going to ask Kevin Morris, who's the Hollywood attorney, and we believe he has a lot of inside knowledge over this artwork and who's purchasing the artwork.
This would be the Hollywood attorney that paid off Hunter's back taxes?
Yeah. The media reports that he's paid Hunter $2.5 million, but it's $5 million. It's $5 million from this Hollywood attorney he never met until Joe was the nominee to be president.
He never met the guy?
Never met the guy. We had the picture when the first time they met. It was at a political fundraiser. So this guy he didn't grow up with, wasn't friends with, like Devin Archer, Boba or any of these guys. And he met this guy. Now this guy has loaned him $5 million at least.
Don't have to put that on your taxes. I guess that's the perk, right?
I tell you, this is, James, thank you. This has been very helpful. And I want us to close. We've heard mountains and mountains of evidence of corruption, mountains of evidence of corruption of Hunter Biden, mountains of evidence of corruption of Jim Biden, mountains of evidence of corruption of Joe Biden. I want us to close with Karine Jean-Pierre claiming there is no evidence. So just give a listen to what the White House is saying, and then we're going to look at the newspaper headlines that have followed.
What we're seeing from House Republicans is wasted time, and it is certainly, baseless political stunt. That's what we're seeing. And they're leaving. House Republicans are leaving this week to go, enjoy a nice holiday, right? As most Americans should. But what happened to the funding to Ukraine? Just ask me about Ukraine. They haven't been able to get that done. They haven't been able to help us fix what's going on at the border. They haven't been able to get that done. They haven't been able to start a conversation on how we're going to avert a shutdown in January. They haven't been able to do that. And so, look, there's been zero evidence. Zero evidence. You can ask me about engagement and what the president has done with his family in conversation, but there's no evidence. But there's no evidence. There is no evidence that the president has done wrongdoing. There's none. Absolutely none. None. And that is just a fact. You've heard it from Republicans themselves. So they're wasting their time. Instead of doing the work on behalf of the American people, they go after the president's family. That's a waste of time.
Every time she says no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, it's a lie. But here, take a look at how Reuters reported the House vote on impeachment. Biden impeachment inquiry authorized by House Republicans, despite lack of evidence. Mind you, this is news. Next headline. New York Times. House approves Biden impeachment inquiry as GOP hunts for an offense. Republicans are pushing forward with a former investigation, even though their year-long scrutiny of the president and his family has turned up no evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors. That is complete BS. By the way, Washington Post, next headline. Washington Post, still lacking evidence. House GOP votes to formalize Biden impeachment inquiry. Lawmakers have said the step will put them on a stronger legal footing for any court challenges related to their investigations. Understand, Reuters, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Karine Jean-Pierre on behalf of the president are lying. And James, thank you for joining us because you have laid out an enormous amount of evidence that apparently you don't exist, the House doesn't exist, the investigation doesn't exist, the bank records don't exist, the WhatsApp doesn't exist, Burisma doesn't exist, $24 million doesn't exist, $240,000 to Joe Biden doesn't exist. None of that exists because we're told there's no evidence. These are lying shills, but the truth will out. Thank you for all you're doing. And James, have a Merry Christmas.
You too. Thank you, Senator.
Congressman, again, thank you so much for joining us. Senator, this is such an important conversation, obviously, and I will say to everyone that's listening, or if you're watching, if you missed part 1 or part 2 of this 3-part series with James Comer, make sure you go back and listen, but also make sure that you help us get the word out. Whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube or on X, you can grab the video and watch. You can share the video there, and also share the podcast links to part 1, part 2, part 3, because without you, the Verdict listeners, this show doesn't happen. And when you share it on social media, you bring so many others into the conversation and allow them to hear the facts of what the mainstream media is not covering. I'll say it again. Thank you to James Comer and Jim Jordan for all their hard work, and we hope you enjoyed everything that we talked about. The Senator and I will see you back here in a couple of days.